sending people with guns.
I didn't realize I was so captivating.
How are you guys so deep into my content?
Everyone who disagrees with me is a Nazi.
All right. G'day. Welcome back to Collectivitis podcast, where we dissect the disease that is collectivism. My name's Pietro. This is Max. How you doing, Max?
Great, Pietro. Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks. Good morning. You can tell from the sleep still in your eyes that this is before 12 o'clock for Max. Max does struggle with those early rises. You okay, Max?
I'm okay. It's been a few late nights at work this week. There we go. Brain's already failing me. Bartending and mornings don't mix well.
No, I can imagine. But you're here to turn it on because we've got a fantastic, the first recurring guest we've ever had on the show, the first person who has agreed to return, which is, I think speaks volumes of them. So we've got, once again, back from Discernible Studios, Mr. Matt Wong. How you doing, Matt?
I'm good. I forgot to put my pronouns. I see Max has got pronouns. Well done.
Unfortunately, they don't carry on to the recording.
Oh, they don't? Okay. So your pronouns are he, she, he.
Yeah. Have a little giggle.
What would your pronouns be, Matt?
Oh, there's some funny ones out there, aren't there? I can't even remember them. Some kind of a silly one. None of your effing business, or I don't know, something like that.
Pietro's was fuck the state.
Yeah, I was disappointed that they don't come onto the recording as well. Anyway, now everyone knows those are my pronouns. I prefer to be referred to as. But yeah, no, welcome back. How you doing?
Listen, I may have made a mistake coming on now that we're here. I'm just realizing because I came on very early in your journey. So, it's like pretty safe. Can help set the tone of your podcast. And since then, I think you've had a number of guests, but I must confess, I haven't been following very closely. So I don't know if you've turned into a radical podcast and I'm sharing the guest stage with some crazy people. I have no idea, actually. I know that Toph has been on, I know I've been on, and I know Kirsty has been on, I think. And that's about it.
Yeah.
Well, if you want some peace of mind, the most important topic we touched on last time was ice cream. Now, I did some research, Matt. I went to the supermarket, purchased a tub of Donata double choc ice cream.
Not the greatest choice, but yeah, go on.
You weren't wrong. It is so expensive. I had to take out a mortgage to buy it. I'm now in debt. The wolves are knocking at the door.
And then interest rates went up since Max bought that ice cream. So, that's...
It was worth it.
Was it good? Was it at least good, Max?
It was good. Sugar-free as well, or mostly sugar-free.
You got to get the sticks, the like Magnums. They're better, not the tubs.
I don't think I saw them in the supermarket. We're limited for choice here in Ballarat.
Anyway, well, let's get started because lots has happened since the last time. It's weird. You don't sort of think of how much has occurred. We talked to you 6 months ago.
Wow.
Or approximately 6 months. I think it was the end of the year. So you sort of don't think about all the things until you take stock of everything that's happened. Last time we spoke, you were quietly, I suppose, optimistic. You had a somewhat optimistic message about the future. And since then, we've had Australia turned almost entirely red, almost entirely Labor, with the exception of Tasmania, who has just in this last week gone to a minority government. They're in turmoil as well, the Liberals there. Inflation, obviously running rampant. Max has had to take out a second mortgage to afford that ice cream. Australia is still following the disastrous, insane US policy of trying to start a nuclear war with Russia. Central bank digital currencies are a thing now that we're all maybe going to have to live with, which is, I think, a sign of the beginning of the end. And in the meantime, Dan Andrews here has started Drag Queen Story Hour just in this last week. So I suppose my first question is, how optimistic are you about the future, Matt?
I don't recall being optimistic. I'm what they call a tragic optimist in the vein of Viktor Frankl, which sees how tragic and disgusting the end of the world is, and yet finds hope within it anyway. So it's not, I'm optimistic, not that things will go well, but that we can be a light in the darkness, if I can put it that way in a general sense.
Yeah, that's right. I think your message was something along the lines of, there's a lot of darkness, but if we cling to the lights, there's an ever increasing, I suppose, density of those lights emerging. Okay. So you're not optimistic about the way things are going.
Well, tragic optimism like Viktor Frankl. So just I'm not surprised, and it may be because my Christian views that the world's going to hell. But whatever the case, I have given up, or not given up. I've never tried to fix the world and make it perfect. I've always just thought, even if we're in the minority, let's be a light for those who choose to believe in principles that you guys may like a smaller government or a better form of ethics that's not so flimsy and consequentialist. Yeah, just being a refuge in the darkness.
Yeah, no, that's true. And I mean, I think the whole point of being a refuge in the darkness is also that, well, I don't know. Okay, I don't think the world is necessarily going to hell the same way. I refuse to let it go. I think that there is hope, and I think that hope is highlighted by the fact that there is the existence of a worldview. Now, I call it libertarianism. You may call it whatever else if you don't prefer the label, but there is a worldview that provides an answer for how this world can exist in a much, much better way, despite the fact that there are clearly forces that are working very much towards the destruction of the world. The idea of the freedom of the individual, the self-autonomy, the way that freedom can work for a person, but also that same ideology happens to have a way in which society can function and prosper. That correlation is more than just a coincidence to me. I think the fact that there is a worldview that both allows individual autonomy and prosperity is too much to be a coincidence. So I'm very hopeful about the way that the world can be, which makes it, I suppose, even more tragic to see that the world is going in the opposite direction. It's going in a much more statist way, and that people who look at individual freedom are vilified. And I don't know. Yeah. What are your thoughts on that sort of idea?
Are you not concerned, though, that perhaps the libertarians amongst us were wrong or are wrong in the sense that our idea, we'll talk about Rothbard and the anatomy of the state and other things today, right? But that's, and Malice is his kind of views. They are somewhat theoretical, at least now. And the reality we're seeing around us is people having more of a social democratic framework in their worldview, the role of the government. And so I have had to make a admission to myself that perhaps libertarianism, though that's what you cut and inside of me is most likely to come out, or a religious type of libertarian, I guess, because I've got that religious faith. But I have had to admit maybe that doesn't work, not because it doesn't work, but because people are broken. And we are reliant. We love to be reliant on a state. And so I think I said on the last time I was on here that the most likely end I see is a Wall-E, by and large type of thing. So I don't really see a 1984. I see more of a Brave New World. And I wonder if we will very much welcome that with open arms. And so I'm scared that if you're a libertarian, I'm scared that you are doing the same thing as the socialists and the communists, the utopian people, that you try to achieve a libertarian utopia when the reality is, there's a good quote about utopia. The problem with utopia is it can only be reached by crossing a sea of blood. And the problem is you never arrive. And that's a quote designed to talk about how terrible collectivism is, right? And I agree with it. But I'm wondering in the same way if libertarianism is just what would you call it? A mental wank, just a thought thing that we're all indulging in. It just doesn't seem to work at a political practice. Do you know what I mean when I say it doesn't work on a political level?
No, I get you. Well, okay. My response to that is I think you're right. I think the direction that we're heading is that. I don't think that's a failure of libertarianism. I think the fact that we're slowly heading towards that is because the state is is winning at what it does. The nature of the state is to expand. And this is, I mean, we spoke before. We wanted to talk a little bit about Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard, which is a text which I am incredibly fond of. It's the reason I became what I became. I held I believe the world was the way it was until I read Anatomy of the State by Murray Rothbard. And in Anatomy of the State, the essence of it is that Rothbard points out that the state purports to be this inevitable entity that works for everyone and that is required for the world to exist. But in reality, it's just an organism that functions in a way that's parasitic to society. And the things that it does, the first things that it does is it has to convince the world that it is both inevitable and necessary. And what we find ourselves in right now, I think in just about every country in the world, is that the state has succeeded in this. And so if the state in each of these countries, and it's kind of self-perpetuating, if every other country in the world has a state that is enormous, then it's not like, it's very difficult for a single country to be like, well, we're going to go in a different direction. And so it's the fact that the state is winning in what the state does that is causing everyone to go into the same direction, where we are heading towards the Wall-E type society where everyone is comfortable. What's the World Health Organization quote? You'll own nothing and be happy. That sort of end game. I don't think, and I also disagree that libertarianism is utopian. I don't think there's any libertarian or anarchist who argues that, in the perfect libertarian society is a utopia. There's still crime. There's still human jealousy. Humans are imperfect, so we cannot have a utopian society. But
I think one of those roles, of libertarianism is that, I agree that a lot of us have that utopian viewpoint, and a lot of libertarians are borderline anarchists. I think, and you've touched on it before, Pietro, you said that libertarianism is an extreme ideology, radical. And on that, the role is to remain radical, because, if we're realists, we know that the government isn't just going to implode and not exist. So you sort of need to have that radical viewpoint to balance like the radical viewpoint of the socialists and have this nice middle ground where you have minimal state.
That's I would agree with you with a lot of that. I would invite us to zoom out, agree with that, and then zoom out and consider whether not just that libertarian principles and Rothbard is correct, but the state has pulled the wool over our eyes. But go one step further and ask ourselves, check ourselves, is the state correct? Could we potentially be wrong in that they are reading the human condition better than we are? Because it seems that if you look at Rothbard's almost anarchism, and then some of the other libertarian philosophies that are kind of minarchism, like a very small state, like Nozick, and then you compare to like the social democratic stuff, which is what we live in today, big welfare state. I used to think that it's just the government has pulled one over us, but now I'm like, I think humans are more dependent, and maybe a social democracy screws their lives more, but maybe it suits them more for what they actually want. And so this brings me to a conclusion that, I leaned into growing up with a faith background and then leaving all that behind and embracing libertarianism when I was younger. And I became a member of the LDP under David Leyonhjelm in Sydney 15 years ago. I thought a secular kind of approach could work, and enlightenment philosophy and science and all these things that I believe in. But then I realized that humans are not enlightened. Humans are not rational. Humans are mostly irrational with brief moments of logic. And so you throw out religion or anything really, you throw out any kind of dogmas or irrationality, and humans just embrace a new form of religion or irrationality. And so I see libertarianism as a very, very rational system. And we're trying to make it fit highly irrational humans.
But don't you think that the tendencies that social democracies are leaning in towards, that humans that apply to humans nowadays, are caused by social democracies? It's not like humans are this thing and social democracy fits that, but it's because we live in these enormous states and can't conceive of anything else that humans are molded into that way that suits them.
No, I think at a biological level, it's the opposite of what you just said. If you look at, for example, even the way our body is set up to maintain calories in terms of our metabolism preferring fast burning sugars and so on, and shutting down any ketogenic processes in your body. It's like the state is the sugar and libertarianism is the low carb, high activity, intermittent fasting diet, like the caveman diet, how we were evolved to be.
Okay.
Right. And then so the state comes along with the sugar. And even right now, if you put a monkey on unlimited food, or you put a human on unlimited calories, which is what our world is, a giant experiment, then you end up with what we get, just this slothful Wall-E thing. And I think that's an inbuilt biological phenomenon of all animals, like humans and apes and everyone, and rats. And you put rats in a test with heroin and food, and you can screw up their lives too. And so I wonder if this is why I'm saying I'm questioning whether libertarian actually works at all, in a sense, if you zoom out far enough, because humans will always prefer the easy, comfortable, patriarchal, look after me type structure.
Well,
Too advanced for our own good.
Sorry, what was that, Max?
I said we're too advanced for our own good.
Mm.
But that I think discounts a really important part of the what makes a human is that, yes, biologically we may take the easy route and we take the thing that's comfortable, but that eliminates a whole aspect of what creates human fulfillment.
Yeah.
I'm sure that anyone who has lived that sort of hedonistic lifestyle of, the rat in the cage that just constantly takes the sugar hit or the, heroin hit or whatever it is, it's killing them, and they're not happy. They're not content. They're not fulfilling that ultimate desire. The Maslow's hierarchy of human needs. There's something intensely missing. And I think that's more natural to humans. I don't think there is any human that is capable of sustaining that hedonistic long term. At some point, there is something missing, and they look for something else.
But think about what you're saying, Pietro. That's you describing the Wall-E world that we're living in already. And so I agree with you that that's not human. What I described, that's not being human. But most people are not being human. And for some of us, I did it for the first sort of 20 years of my life, and then I became a very high agency, internal locus of control, like a high achieving human later on. But some people don't take 20 years to get there. Some people take 80 years. In other words, they're dead before they get to start being human. They never live. And if you look around the world, most people are doing exactly that. And so, yes, you and I might live higher agency, and we might, embrace some of these higher levels of self-actualization and embrace hard work and reward and so on. But we will always be in the minority. And if you look throughout history, those who have progressed humanity have always been in the minority, and they get flack on the way up. It's like that quote, there's no point being a pioneer. You only end up with an ass full of arrows, right? They're like those people. They get arrows in the ass all decade long, and then they win at something, and everyone cheers and says, yay, humanity's awesome. I'm like, shut up, Muppets. Well, 99% of you were not out there pioneering. You were screwing him, and you were shooting him in the ass, and now you're like, humanity's great, and they go back to their quiet lives of insignificance. Sorry, that's quite negative on humanity.
So just to clarify, do you still have a positive outlook, Matt?
Viktor Frankl, that's the Frankl view of tragic optimism, that the world will be 90% or probably 80-20, I'd say.
So do you think I don't know that necessarily humanity has always been so the way that you've just described, because do you not think that in the past there was maybe not a majority, but certainly a higher density? And I'm not saying the good old times. I'm talking about Independence America, which had obviously such a high density of people with the same views and morals that they created, this new state, which is probably the closest that the world has ever seen to a libertarian state. The Constitution is the most libertarian document ever. The whole purpose of it is to limit the state. Now, obviously, that has become intensely corrupted and used by the state to funnel its own and legitimize its own expansion. but certainly there was a higher density then of people who wanted more, who had these views, who were alive in the sense that we were talking about before.
Yeah, but still in the minority. So even if you look at like Jamestown and you look at the initial, what do you call them, the Pilgrims in the US, we have this romantic view that they were all these pioneers, full of self-determination and blah, 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 libertarian philosophy. And of course, a high percentage were, but that basic trend remains. There's a lot of hangers-on in those stories when you read about some great person going across to another land, or Captain Cook or whoever coming here to Australia. There's still idiots on the ship too, who were just cowering under the patriarchal covering of the leader up front. And I use patriarchy a lot in this interview in a positive sense. I think it's the good parts of patriarchy, leadership. But so I think you're saying there's more than there is now. Yeah, absolutely. And that's the whole argument of that we're going into a Wall-E world. But we look back romantically on history, and we have to remember that there's always been weak humans behind in the wake of those strong humans we see in history.
Yeah, and this is something that is still, I think, still fits in within the libertarian, I suppose, answer, is that there's always going to be there's a need for natural elites. Like there is a need for people that the weak ones can follow. I mean, I'm always in search for some libertarian icon speaker who's really good that I can say, yes, I believe what they're saying. I'm willing to support them. And I've found a few, and I'd say Michael Malice is certainly
absolutely
one of them. Yeah. And unfortunately, Rothbard's dead, so I can't follow him into battle. But if I'd read him while he was still alive, if I'd been alive while he was still alive, absolutely, someone inspirational that we can follow. The problem is that with the state and the incentives that the state has to expand and justify its own existence, the people who end up being in the elite class are not impressive, well-meaning elites. They're self-serving elites who use the government to maintain their position, and the weak people are tricked into being part of this system, which they're tricked by thinking that it's you're helping out each other and it's social justice and it's this, that, and the other, but they're tricked into essentially funding the lives of these unimpressive and unnatural elites.
Yeah, you're changing the definition of elites now, right? So, and they're both correct, but throughout the conversation, I've been referring to elites as the high-functioning individuals who are somewhat altruistic, the good libertarian warriors who stand up the front and make humanity better for all of us. You're now referring to the current, more common elite we have, who is doing it for their own benefit, right? So I think what we're observing is the human need for leadership. And what I've been describing is that there's way more people hiding behind people of greatness. And when I say greatness now, I mean anyone who read the history books, whether that be terrible like Mao, or whether it be awesome like Rothbard, or whether it be the founders of the Constitution and the US independence movement. Just people who stand up the front in leadership is the pointy tip of the arrow, or the flock of birds in a V shape, and behind them is more than the number of people at the front, right? They're minimal. And so I think what we're observing is I'm moving into a guessing territory. I would guess now that we simply have fewer people being good leaders, and we have a lot of bad leaders who are co-opting the same inherent need to follow. Most humans follow. There's a common 80-20, I don't know if it's 90-10 or whatever. People say 20% of people just will not follow their natural leaders, and they can end up being cantankerous people who won't submit to even good laws. So you just have this natural sense of stubborn people in the community who can end up being flagrants, or they can end up being really powerful leaders. And that's what the US was, right? A bunch of rebels who said screw you to the laws, and you think, well, they're criminals. If that happened today, people would be like, who are these clowns? And but we lionize them. So yeah, I think the co-opting of humans need leadership is what's happening in the elite. So if you look at the world, what are they called? World Economic Forum. You and I might recoil in horror about some of the things that they push onto us. But if you look at around when they talk about, let's say, even in myself, the idea of a 15-minute city, or you'll own nothing and be happy, a subscription model is quite convenient. Thank you very much. And a 15-minute city sounds quite good. And yeah, okay, maybe you're going to lock me down, but you'll provide everything I need, and Netflix will be free, and I get a universal basic income. And I think that they're actually successfully leading this ignorant population we call humans that I've been describing. And we need to step up and provide solid leadership and inspire that ignorant group of humans to be better, just like those heroes of old have done.
That's well, I mean, yeah, that's I suppose, like, yes, if I'm feeling very inspirational about my role, that's what I would call kind of what I'm trying to do. Obviously, we're all very much pushing shit uphill against a power that is right now enormously winning. I think a good example of the power, the need and the possibility for improvement by using these impressive elites is Elon Musk. Yes. Like the elites. Now, Elon Musk wasn't entirely a natural elite. He did use government subsidies to initially amass much of his wealth. But his adherence to the need for freedom of speech and what he did with Twitter was something that would never have happened without just a rogue, elite, impressive person with obviously the means to do something like that. And that alone is something that is an immense cause for hope, but also you can see how rare and unlikely something like that could occur.
Yeah, he's a mixed bag, isn't he? Probably not the best.
Yeah, he's not entirely, anyway.
No, I'm glad he's around. But I'm thinking more towards the idea that it's like the Liberal Party or the Libertarian Party complaining that the electorate doesn't understand the value of small government. I'm like, well, okay, yeah, you may be correct, but you have a responsibility to get out there and meet them where they're at and convince them to be better humans. And if you look at the greats in history, if you go and look at the founding fathers of the US, the reason why they were so good was not because they walked around saying, shut up, Muppets, you're all idiots, do what I say. They were able to inspire and garner widespread political support for their little movement called the US, right? Or the states of the US. So we've got to take that upon ourselves. It's our job to do that. And that's why I think you have some, well, at least what I've tried to do with Discernible, and I think from what I've seen of you guys, you're doing it as well. We don't just sit here and complain about big government. Michael Malice does this as well. We might criticize it, but this is not the Young Turks where we just throw problems into the internet and say this sucks. This is not your typical leftist. It's not Marxism, which is primarily just a critique. We are actually trying to inspire people, and you are with libertarianism. We're actually trying to take them along for the journey. And I think that's something that you see in the worst parts of the libertarian movement, the angry government sucks. What's wrong with you sheep? And I don't think that's going to do anything. And more than that, I don't think it's right, because that's not what humans are. Like, if you think about leadership, good leadership, your job is to not tell everyone what they're doing wrong. And your job is not to look down on them and think they're stupid, that they have to follow you because there's dumb sheep. Your job as a leader is to see the best in people and to bring it out of them, is to serve them. Like the servant leadership model we keep hearing in corporates nowadays. I think that's the correct approach for leadership. And I wish more libertarians would do this. So people like David Leyonhjelm, who I very much like. If I had to find one negative to say about him, it might be this. He's so salty, which I enjoy. Yeah. But he's so salty that it can come across like he's just calling everyone an idiot because they're not libertarian enough.
Yeah, and yes, he's been described as grumpy on more than one occasion. I think you're right. I think that is a problem that occurs sometimes in libertarian circles, is that when you start to... I lived most of my libertarian life as the only libertarian that I knew. And it was intensely exciting when I started to meet other libertarians, but it's also a problem because you start getting into this echo chamber and you start thinking, yes, of course we're right. And yes, you start to resent the people who don't agree with you, which is what is part of why I think Anatomy of the State is like, I used to fob that off to all of my friends. None of them ever read it, but like because it breaks it down in a slow, gradual, logical, reasonable way, how and irrefutable how the current system is actually exploitative and wrong. And I think, and yes, absolutely, the first goal should be to try and educate. More than inspire, I think it's kind of like open that gate towards the idea that maybe the world as we see it is not, or the world as we're told it exists is not entirely accurate and correct. Which was part of the reason why I found like the COVID period, as horrific as it was, and as much as everyone wants to forget about it now, I found it intensely exciting because for the first time, people who would never have listened to a libertarian or would never have even conceived of the notion that the government is doing things that are not in their best interest and that it's not benevolent and that it's not right and it's not guided by reason, it's guided by self-interest and interest groups and whatever, were confronting these ideas. It was intensely exciting, and I thought, here it is. This is the moment of the revolution. By comparison, I find nowadays the kind of reluctance to even want to discuss the COVID period and the really fervent desire to return to normal life, which I can understand. I can certainly empathize, but it's way less exciting than it was during that period there. Anyway.
I would argue that I agree with you. I would argue during that COVID period, it was an exciting period. We had a lot of freedom movement pushback pop up, which is absolutely necessary. And I wish it was stronger in Australia like it was in the US. However, I don't think the future is there. I think we need them, absolutely, and I support their work. But I think the future is, I would say this when I'm biased, so I would say the future is more with platforms like Discernable or with Rogan, who you could fairly accuse, but Rogan or Matt on Discernable, they're kind of wishy-washy, and sometimes they have a Labor figure on and they agree with them. And that's true. We are wishy-washy. But you got to understand who our audience is compared to who the freedoms movement's audience is. I wish we lived in a world full of freedom movement supporting people. They're cool people, but we don't. We live with what we've described, these sleepy people, and those are the people that I reach. The stories I had coming out of COVID, and Rogan and Tim Paul and others would have stories like this as well. And Chris Williams' Modern Wisdom podcast will have these stories. The average suburban state-believing people who didn't suddenly get radicalized and the state's evil and let's go to a protest about freedom, but they said, wow, I have just realized a few things by watching your programs, and I'm still just a mum with 3 kids in school, but when I go to the school board meeting now, I do this. When I go to soccer class, I teach the kids, and they're being moved on a cultural level. And the reason why I think that's the future is because that is longer lasting. We can see that with the freedom movement peaks and then drops. And also, more importantly, there's more of them, right? There's just simply more of the people that I'm talking to than a freedom protest group.
Matt, is Q&A salvageable, or as long as it's run by ABC, it won't be?
So I don't know when you're publishing. I don't know when you're publishing this, but Stan Grant has quit Q&A yesterday, I think, because of I don't know what words to use. Repeated racism, recurrent racism, something like that. It's funny, the only one who keeps on talking about race is Stan Grant. And the only one who keeps talking about his skin color. Okay, there's a whole bunch of people saying, oh, you're not Aboriginal, you're tanning yourself. They're having a go at him for his skin color, yes. But the person who started all of that was not those, if you could argue they're racist people, whatever. It wasn't those racists. It was Stan Grant. He's put such a focus on his skin color and on race from day one. And it's typical of the left, right? Of the authoritarians. Is it salvageable? I think it must be. This is like it's so critical, and everyone's like burn the ABC down. And I've even put out interviews and stuff saying defund the ABC. Yeah, and yes, that's great. But now I'm coming around to the view. There's so many people watching it. I said to someone the other day, he's all into new media. And he goes, so what do you do with Discernable? I said, the quickest way to say, do you know Joe Rogan in the US? And people say, yeah. And whether they like him or hate him, they go, yeah, I've heard about this guy. I say, we just do that. We have conversations. But this guy, he was all into new media. I said, do you know Joe Rogan in the US? He goes, no, who's that? And this guy is pretty big in the finance world. And I'm thinking, there's a lot, and he thinks he knows new media. There is so many people like that. So I think they're the ones watching Q&A. And if you want to change this country, we need to reach those people. So personally, I've been posting about I'd love to do the Q&A gig, not because it'll be fun. Everyone will think they'll go, you're a pussy. They'll have a go at me for sure. But I think it really needs to be reformed, and we need it. We can't just say screw it. We need to have someone good in there. Someone really good to me there would be Peter Boghossian. He would be better than me. Peter Boghossian, as he's one of the co-authors of the So-Called Squared fiasco, where they made fake peer-reviewed academic papers that got passed. He does a thing called street epistemology. He's very good at parking his own views and hosting. So that would be my preference, to salvage Q&A with something like that. That said, it won't happen because culturally I'd be booted out before my first show went to air, probably.
Well, if the opportunity did present itself, it would be like a beacon to provide change. You've got the audience there. If, obviously, huge hypothetical, if ABC came to you and asked you to be the host,
yes,
but it would involve you, obviously, you wouldn't have time to do Discernible anymore. Would you do it?
I work over 100 hours a week now. I was keeping 95. I'm about 105, 110. I'm buying a farm at the moment. A bunch of us are doing a farm project. So yeah, I'd do it. I'd work 40 hours on Discernible, 40 hours on Q&A, whatever. Yeah, it needs to be done. It has to be done. But look, it's not going to happen. We're talking about hypotheticals now.
Well, I mean, the argument is the same as the reason why Elon Musk bought Twitter. Like, Twitter was completely compromised, and it was destroyed Twitter. It's just a shill company organization that pushes the left, and he bought it because he saw that there was an importance that there was a neutral town square, like there wasn't a chance to have these discussions openly. Yep. And I mean, it sounds like what you're saying is that Q&A can be that same forum here in Australia. Yeah,
it doesn't have to specifically be that show. But the idea of those pillar shows like the Today Show, Ali Langdon, that idiot, you can't just shut that idiot show down. There's too many people watching it. We need to reform them.
Yeah, no, agreed. We were talking before, and sorry to kind of veer back to that bit there, but we were talking before about how, we need to reach people and, the educate the masses or inspire the masses and all of that. My question is, and it can come across a little bit as blaming the masses, which I don't really intend to do, but do you think that Australians or the masses are capable in the modern day? Australia is defined basically by political apathy, I think.
That's true. It's true.
Is there, are we fighting a noble battle where we're correct and everything that is actually impossible? Like a country that is founded on the idea of not caring and she'll be right and whatnot. Sounds, carefree and idealistic and all the rest of that, but actually it's fertile ground for a state to take all those things that she'll be right about. Yeah, that's a sobering thought, and I really hope I'm wrong, but that's kind of why COVID was really exciting, because for a few seconds there, she wasn't right. It wasn't she'll be right, and we were activated. We were protesting in the streets like those idiot Americans do all the time and whatnot.
It was incredible.
For the first time, you could make now. Obviously, I'm a libertarian. I'm not a fan of guns, right? I don't love the idea of guns. And
how odd.
Yeah, right. Murdering other people. But I also think that the Second Amendment, as it is intended, the well-armed militia to be able to defend against an oppressive state, is a very justified reason for citizens to be armed, because the government is armed and the government does horrific things all the time. And it was an impossible topic to broach to Australians. Prior,
it still is.
For a short period there were a lot of people who were more open to the idea when the police were rubber bulleting people in the streets.
If it got worse, it would have helped. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. And to be honest, like, it could have got worse. Like, it's not like they weren't willing to go more violent. It was just that it kind of dissipated for a number of reasons. I think the fact that Omicron exposed everything and came in at a time when, you know, everyone who wasn't vaccinated got sick and became immune anyway, and anyone who was vaccinated got sick and, you know, had it anyway. And it kind of made both sides' arguments a little bit irrelevant.
Yeah.
And I think that helped sort of dissipate the tension that was building up in all of Australia at that point. But without that, I think the government would have become more violent. And for a little while there, you could talk about guns to Australians, because Australians, you know, it's guns and Americans is this idiotic thing that, you know, they're just shooting children all the time. And I think that's why I was so excited about COVID, because for a moment you could do that. Can you do that in normal times? I don't know.
Well, the Second Amendment was sort of around to, you know, not so every single person could walk around with a gun in their hand and shoot whatever or whoever they wanted. It was, if the government gets out of control, you need to be able to defend yourself. So yeah, good point. You know, a lot of Australians were awoken to the need to have a means to protect yourself, because when they take it all away from you, you really leave yourself vulnerable.
I think it's an absolute dead end, not gun rights, the 2A style thing in Australia, because undergirding the Second Amendment in the US is a culture of personal responsibility that we do not have. And I fear if we rolled out the Second Amendment tomorrow in Australia, I am with the anti-gun activists on this. I would prefer that reality, actually, but I'm with them that we would just end up with a mess of a place. We do not possess the personal responsibility to handle something as powerful as guns everywhere. And we have been pushed into an infantilized point where if you armed all Britons, all UK people, if you armed all Australians, then it just wouldn't work. We don't have people are scared of knives. People are pretty cotton-wooled here in Australia that I don't trust to give them all guns. So you would have to lay a foundation of that rugged, independent spirit that Americans have vestiges of today. You'd have to lay that foundation for decades, perhaps 1 or 2 generations first, before you started to give Australians more personal freedoms. I'm sounding like the authoritarians right now, but I don't think Australians can actually handle more freedom because they don't know how to handle more responsibility. And per our first chat, I think freedom and responsibility don't go hand in hand. I think they are literally the same thing.
I was just about to bring that up.
Yes, and I think even if you look at the US is a very interesting thing to look at, because it is literally lots of different countries existing within under one name. Like, the people of Texas are very different to the people of Washington, or the people of California, or the people of Florida, or the people of Alabama. Like, they are very much different cultures. And I think you find that in the US, the places that have the freest gun laws, where there isn't the enormous crime, gun violence rates, occurs in places where there is an intense focus on community and personal responsibility. And, you know, the reason that it's good that your neighbor has a gun is because you trust and know your neighbor. And if someone were to come in that area and cause some trouble, you want them to be able to protect you, and this reliance on each other rather than the state. I think, again, that comes down to Australia, where we have become so cushioned and so reliant on the state to do everything that it wouldn't work, because you don't trust your neighbor in Australia. If most people are worried that their neighbor's doing weird stuff or making noise at night, and they call the police. Because it's the police that helps you against your neighbor, which is a completely backwards to the idea of community and the idea of personal responsibility and the idea of democracy down to the lowest possible level, the democracy of one, the democracy of the street that you live in, this reliance on each other. So in
Either
that
way,
vein,
though, you're always relying on the person with the gun. You're relying on your neighbor who has the gun, or you're relying on the cops who have the gun.
Oh, that's true.
You're relying on the person who has power.
Yes, well, if there is the existence of guns, then guns are the thing that's the highest way to cause physical violence. That's the thing you need to defend against physical violence.
Max raises a very interesting point just now that the blue states, the Democrats, during COVID, they're all calling, Dave Rubin's friends were calling him, Joe Rogan's blue New York City friends were calling him saying, how do I get a gun? Right? You're right. People rely on others for their protection. And I think this is the outsourcing of responsibility. So many humans want you to protect them. It's the same with meat, right? Like, I want you to go through the grisly act of killing an animal and butchering it up and give me a nice little tray wrapped in plastic of lamb loin chops. They're always outsourcing responsibility on every level. And I think that's that's probably the majority that they would outsource. That's kind of a more complex version of what we were talking about of laziness and built into our biology, taking the path of least resistance. People want to have a free ride on the responsibility of others. And back to an earlier thing that we we're talking about, leadership. My argument beyond that is, well, maybe instead of just yelling at them, idiots, take responsibility. Maybe we need to take some responsibility and accept that only 20% of the population will ever be leaders. And instead of seeing them as idiot sheep who are going over the cliff, maybe we need to see them as what the Bible says, sheep without a shepherd. So a heart of compassion to say, yes, they're idiots. Yes, they're sheep doing stupid things going over the cliff, but all they're missing is a shepherd, a good shepherd. And that's the challenge, is how do you not become a dictator? But they just need a little bit of leadership. And so I would question some of the libertarian movement and some of personal influences like Lionhelm or Malice hasn't really done this, but Lionhelm and others, whether they see people as idiot sheep to be fixed and slapped and kept in line, he'd probably disagree with that painting, but the kind of the saltiness, or whether we have a heart of compassion towards these so-called sheep and we are willing to serve them. There's the distinct lack of that in the freedom movement as well. I think we don't have a libertarian movement in Australia. We have a freedom movement and the Clive Palmer and all of that. But they're angry by and large, which is really disappointing. Not all, but most, I would say. They're angry at the structures. And like, this is not how we should be seeing the sheep in our society. We should be seeking to serve them.
Yeah, I think they I don't think they see them as, need to be slapped down and kept in line. I think the view of like the salty freedom libertarian, however you want to call it, movement is they're like, that's stupid. They deserve whatever they get. Like, leave them to that's kind of the way the salty libertarian looks at the people who are, what I would argue, indoctrinated by the state. But someone who's indoctrinated, by definition, it's not their fault. They are brainwashed and just responding to what they've been taught is correct and good and just.
I would argue it is their fault, Pietro. At the end of the day, it is their fault for. You can't take that agency away from them and say, "Oh, it's not your fault." I think that leads us into a Daniel Andrews type place. So I'm suggesting strong leadership, right? But I'm not for a moment suggesting the Daniel Andrews style of leadership, like give power to me and I will fix it, which is kind of that, it's not your fault. The state should fix it for you because it's not your fault. I think we should teach them personal agency and responsibility and give them, not steal their agency like that. It's not your fault, I'll fix it. No, it should be, well, maybe that part of your life was partially or fully your fault, but let me serve you and lead you on how to come out of that and fix it.
It's interesting. I think whether someone who's indoctrinated, it's their fault, because see, I would say that the vast, like, if we're doing that, it's taking a step back, looking at society as it exists, the Western world largely, most people are indoctrinated to the idea that the state is benevolent, good, and necessary. I think there's a quote from Murray Rothbard, which I'd written down. I knew you liked quotes. The majority must be persuaded by ideology that their government is good, wise, and at the least inevitable. I think.
Oh, that's good. Inevitable.
Yes. And I think the majority of people are indoctrinated into that view. Now, do we attribute blame and maybe this is where you and I differ, do we attribute blame to the individuals who are incapable of breaking out of this indoctrinated view, and some of them are and some of them aren't? Or do we attribute the blame to the state and the organization of the state and the things that it is intentionally doing by its own nature to expand and justify itself? And the solution is more difficult to find than who we attribute blame to. But I'd say I attribute blame to the state.
Okay. Yeah, I think we do for the.
Yeah. I also think that one of the reasons why it's so difficult to make any sort of change in the political realm is that humans are tribalistic by nature. Like it's so much easier to get swept up in team A or team B and overlook the negative parts of your side because you want to win.
Team Human. I can't really show it. Team Human. This is my brand. That's the team we should be swept up in.
That's Team C. You got Team A, Team B, Team C, which is Team Human.
You're trying to tap into the tribalistic nature for
quite literally, yes. Yes.
Team A, Rolex, Team B, Team Human.
So what does Team Human stand for then? What's the
when I was speaking to Dr. Cameron Murray, I've had him on the show a few times. He's about group dynamics and group think. He's an economist, but he does a lot of psychology experiments. So he does experiments in universities where he will test. He'll give people. Game theory, right? He'll give them money, and if you steal off that person, you get to keep their money. But if they steal off you as well, if they make that independent decision at the same time, then you both get nothing. So game theory, right? And he advised me that Discernable is great, and not just Discernable, but this overall Joe Rogan style push to have people think a bit more broadly and so on. But he said at the end of the day, humans are tribal, and they need tribal monikers. Things to unite them. And so we came up with this idea of giving everyone a sense of team human, and other people could do this with different words, but this idea of belonging to a team, and by definition a team has to have an anti-team, an enemy. So that's that great quote of that any movement can exist without the belief in a god, but no movement can exist without a devil. You must have something you're standing against. And so he gave me this idea of uniting everyone into a group called Team Human, but it really stands for unity anyway. It's kind of a double play. So that's what that's about.
So who's the devil?
Well, you can either leave it a little bit undefined, because that's not the point. Is not to have a clear definition of the devil. The point is to give people a sense that they're uniting against something. And so in our case, we've kind of written that line that we stand against division and hate, but that's very ephemeral. So
and the left would argue like that those are talking points of the left, which is they're hypocritical on their side. I think your side's correct, but that's, I think, dangerous in trying to identify with those words.
Yeah, we don't actually say those words. We stand against division and hate, but the feel of it, so I'll put up posts like, how awesome humans are. So it's the misanthropic view of humans are a cancer on the planet, I think, is one of the key divisionary tools that the elites use to divide us. Even though they're not saying the black people should be angry at the Asian people, by pushing this idea that humans are a cancer and we see ourselves as this negative, then they can then slice up and divide the place. Well, I'm trying to push humans are awesome. We are not just another animal. We're amazing. And that inherently unites people, you see, without me saying, let's all sing and sit in a circle and sing Kumbaya. I'm trying to be a bit sneakier than that and unite people.
Yeah, I agree that it's a lot easier to jump on board with a cause when there is a boogeyman on the other side. Like I think that's one of the most motivating things within human nature, is seeing, I don't know, an injustice or a wrong or something that is causing evil, or even if it's not, even if it's purely just, team A versus team B, but the uniting against the enemy is I don't know. And I think it's also like historically biological, like the young men who'd go off to war and there needed to be a war to fight at some point. Otherwise the young men grew restless kind of idea of the past.
And I mean, you can hear the the wavering in how I talk about Team Human. I still haven't figured it out. It's very hard to try and create a devil without just becoming another freedom movement. I hate the elite type of thing. So even I'm still really struggling to kind of flesh this out. It'll take years.
Yeah. I suppose there is one thing before we finish that I wanted to hear your thoughts on, to do a bit of a 180 turn here. You recently came out as a transphobe.
Oh wow, you follow deeply. Yeah.
Well, and I think this is and obviously part of the state's strategy, and certainly a recent kind of last, I don't know, 100-year strategy, is to play identity politics.
Yes.
And to divide groups and to create an in-group and an out-group, and the out-group is victimized, and then to attribute blame to certain parts of the in-group and to use that to guide public discussion. And I think that probably is tapping into that human need for the evil and the boogeyman.
Yes,
it's just manufactured evil and manufactured boogeymen.
Yes.
And I think the latest iteration, and possibly the one, and I guess this is a cause for hope, possibly the iteration that is the most absurd is this one that they're pushing with like trans rights and whatnot. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on that.
So the reason why I came out as a transphobe was what you've described. I'm trying to disarm their setting up of two camps. You know, you're an anti-vaxxer, and I've seen some people say, "Yeah, I'm an anti-vaxxer," and I was like, "Oh, okay. Well, then their insult doesn't work on you anymore." So for this, you're a transphobe, Matt. And I looked at it, and so two things happen. One, I think they legitimately might have a point if I go on their definitions that I'm intolerant to some of these transgender sports players, where you know, what's the name, the swimmer guy,
Leah Thomas,
plainly a grift, plainly that is a man, plainly that is a lie, is literally doesn't even attempt to present as a woman. Anyway, so partly they're true if I'm rejecting of Leah Thomas's decision, and then I guess on their definition I'm a transphobe and bigoted. But more importantly, I wanted to take away the power of it. And you'll see, like, I have interactions with people on Discernible and elsewhere, especially on Twitter all the time, where they'll say, "You're an idiot, you don't know what you're talking about, you just won't have other views on," or something like that. And instead of fighting and saying, "Well, actually, I've had all these sorts of views, and now I will," but instead of fighting, I just roll over and say, "Yeah, you're probably right. I am a bit of an idiot." Or, "You know, you're right. I probably haven't invited enough people from the other side. Would you like to come on?" "Oh, no, I wouldn't come on your show. It's full of blah, blah." But see, I win. I win because you're right. You don't know what you're talking about. You need to have a transgender person on. Okay.
Come on.
Would you like to come on? And you just can't lose by being vulnerable like that if it's done in good faith. You know, when they then say, "I would never come on your bigoted, anti-transgender, transphobic show," if I then turn around and said, see, you suck, you are all stupid, then I haven't really won. But I don't. I turn around and say, "Oh, see, you didn't want to come on. That's not very good. But hey, just so you know, even though you've just attacked me, you are still welcome." I would love to have. So I do this with a girl called Dan Fangirl on Twitter. She's hopelessly partisan. Like, she'll literally just yell, "Cooker!" It's really bad. But I would very much like to have her on and just to hear her out. And you've seen my interviews, very, very warm. Even if I think she's crazy, I won't sit there and call her crazy. I'll be like, "Well, tell me more." Like, I'm open to you changing my mind. But she tries to bait me. And she throws stuff. It's like a child, you know, when you're in a relationship and the other person's being childish. She throws stuff to try and trigger me, and I go to take the bait. I'm like, "No, not doing it." And so she'll say something inflammatory, and I'll just respond back, "Okay, I still really like to hear your views. So if you want to come on, we're here for you." And I just will not engage in her bait. And then it's funny because she goes quiet, and then 3 weeks later, she'll comment on some other tweet I do. and she'll throw bait again. And so I've got her. I'm in her head, right? But I'm not in her head to screw with her. I legitimately want to build a friendship with her, and hopefully I can improve her and she can improve me. Let's talk. But when you see her fighting with others on Twitter, she baits them, they bait back, and then they're in this war and she loves it. Oh, I told you you're a cooker. It just goes around and around.
I'm with you though on taking the power away from their insults and their words, because you don't get anywhere with that. Like, you don't get anywhere just like throwing things at each other. You get somewhere by actually saying, okay, well, like you say, hear me out, or give me a chance to hear you out. Let's delve into this deeper. One thing I do want to say though is the word phobe really grinds my gears, because technically a phobia is a fear, isn't it?
Yeah, disgust or a fear, I think. Yeah.
Yeah. So did you say a disgust or a fear?
Yeah, when I looked it up and when I admitted to being transphobe in that post, I think disgust was in there as well.
Okay. I wasn't aware of the word disgust being in the definition, because I was going to say, because it's not a fear. It's having different viewpoints, but they always throw it at you like it's a fear, and like yeah.
Well, to be fair, if you look at the reaction towards some of I'm against the drag queen story time at Monash and blah, blah, blah. But I can see where people like Dan Fangirl get their ammunition from to say you're a phobe, you're fearful, because some of the emotional reaction, which is justified from people against drag time story hour, can appear quite emotional. And I see how they could argue that it's phobic. But what's the problem? Like, why is it that you're allowed to marginalize people who have fears? You're not allowed to so other people who have fears and issues and whatever, we've got to kind of help them, right? So this is the left. Like, we appreciate. Can't even use their words. You know, when you see someone who's in a minority group, someone who's struggling, we don't want to punch down. But when it comes to people who are scared of, say, vaccines, say they're scared of vaccines, we can punch down to them. Or they're scared of transgenderism, we punch down to them and call them bigots. Instead of trying to take the leftist point of view, we should be trying to help them, meet them where they're at, and gently help them to appreciate and respect transgender people. But no, we don't. We just say, screw you, bigot.
I'm a vulnerable minority. Please help me.
So hypocritical. It's not funny.
But I prefer my left to be hypocritical. It would be harder to I think a really good avenue for kind of pushing libertarianism is this culture wars stuff, because I think I don't know that like if we're talking about culture wars stuff, people are incredibly animated by it, and at the end of the day, it's stuff that people will vehemently disagree with, to the point that the only real solution is decentralization, where you can just live among your own types and your own. So the more this culture war stuff kind of heats up, I think the more we can push a message of, you're never going to agree with this group of people. The fact that you should be sharing a country and funds and a society with people that you vehemently hate is unnecessary, and it's harmful, and you shouldn't all come under the banner of the one government or the one.
I think you're being utopian, Pietro. I don't think that's what we're seeing. I think we're seeing the authoritarians, the new modern left. We're seeing them co-opt the halls of power. Daniel Andrews is flying a transgender flag at Parliament. When Monash University cancelled the Drag Time Story Hour, he held it at the Victorian Parliament instead. Your method's not going to work. I'm not saying it's. I'm saying it's definitely like pushed using state power, but I think the fact that it does this and it polarizes people is actually causing a deeper divide, and the opportunity to reach people like the COVID period was, because the COVID period caused division, rather than a gentler, quieter approach of trying to sort of meet both halfway. I think this, like the fact that they had Drag Queen Story Hour and that lots of people would have been enraged by it, actually helps create a resistance to the left and to authoritarianism and to expansion of the state that wouldn't occur wouldn't occur as easily if they just quietly expanded. Yeah, I see what you're saying. Well, they've been quietly expanding for decades with their march to the institutions, and now they may be overplaying their hand, which is James Lindsay's argument.
Yes, that's essentially what I'm saying, is that now they're overplaying their hand, whereas in, the state's been growing since the state existed. Like they've been doing it incrementally. And here, this is a bridge too far that I think the absurdity of it, and transgender athletes destroying women, and the fact that now suddenly women who are who have been oppressed by the patriarchy and men for decades and have been the victim group for such a long time, now they're ignored for the sake of transgender people. I think that's an absurdity which has the potential to wake a lot of people up.
Yeah, but be aware that a power vacuum is forming as well. So we need some cultural leaders to come through behind the protesters and say what the reality is, because that's what the left did really well. Not only did they have a Marxist criticism of power structures, they came through behind with a new structure, and James Lindsay outlines this brilliantly on his YouTube channel, New Discourses. So right now, we need more cultural leaders to come out and say things like that. Look, there's only two genders, or what I did on your last show. It was a weak position. I didn't do it very strongly, but I came out and said, look, I think sex is best preserved for marriage, and there are reasons for that. That's a countercultural, risky thing for me to say, and so we need those people to come through, because I think at the end of the day, people are still not going. They may protest for a season, but that stops. And at the end of the day, you still need that 20% of leadership to come through, and for the other 80% to stand behind. So right now, I'm thinking about what can I say about issues like transgenderism. Can I provide covering for other people to stand behind me if I have a little bit of a platform and say, I think Leah Thomas is a man. So I might take a hit for saying that, but people can hide behind me and say, well, I didn't say it, Discernable said it. And we need more of that cultural leadership.
Yeah, and I think it's a very brave thing you're doing, especially because you have very carefully curated a reputation as being a not a moderate, but someone who is open to all viewpoints, and someone who is not. And you get people from both sides who are willing to come onto your show. You haven't pigeonholed yourself into one core group of people, but with the vehement anger and desire to cancel that is growing, and the list of topics for which it's possible to be cancelled for ever increasing, and this is probably going to be one of them. It's already happened with, for example, J.K. Rowling, who everyone still loves Harry Potter, but she's somehow detached from the thing that she created. Yes. It is a brave thing that you're doing, and but it's a dangerous game to be playing if you've got something to lose, which I think you do.
I don't have anything to lose, which is a cool thing. I don't make a lot of money from Discernible, and my MO has been, if they say you're a transphobe, I'll say, well, I can see how that might be correct. Okay, what's next?
But you have your ability to get people from both sides of the fence to lose.
I don't know about that, because I'm not a what's that guy who did What Is a Woman?
Matt Walsh.
Matt Walsh. Or Ben Shapiro, or David Harris Jr., these figures on the sort of right wing. I don't make strong statements. You know what's annoying me, just to get off myself for a moment, this idea of humanity being a cancer on the planet. I'm currently really trying to wave the flag of humans are better than animals. Humans are superior. This would offend the vegans, right? Humans are superior. They're the king of the planet. They're the crown of creation. They are, or the crown of evolution, whatever. They not only do they have the right to oppress and subjugate the earth, that right, that power, that moral good for them to be kings of the world also means they have an immense responsibility to steward the world and do a much better job, whether it comes to climate change or it comes to environmentalism or pollution or whatever, and how they treat animals and factory farming and so on. So it's quite a radical position to take. No one's really doing that. But I think if more of us did that, took some classical positions like that, we might get a lot of support. People who make it cool again to say humans are the dominant species on the planet, and they should be, and they just need to do a lot better at stewarding. That's all.
Yes, I think that is you're right. That's a classical view. Like, I think that would have been the assumed viewpoint I don't know exactly how many years ago, but and that's certainly like a core tenet of like Christianity, is that humans are above animals. It's more than animals. It's not just the opposable thumbs. It's the soul and all of that. I think, and I also think most people, if you pushed them on it, would still agree with that.
Yeah. It's funny, they live in a cognitive dissonance.
Yes.
Yeah.
Double think. Sorry, you go.
But there are a number of issues like that where I think we all need to start being culturally bold to take classical positions. And the only way you can be bold is if you have the willingness to take the arrows and be vulnerable. So if I'm trying to think of another area, but any area where it's a risk, because they might turn around and say, well, you are a insert blank.
I'd say the importance of the nuclear family and the nuclear family being independent of this. I think that's another thing that's a classical position and it's under threat.
Yep. So stand up for the classical family. Oh, so you hate people who have broken up or single mothers and whatever. We have to be then not get into the no. I like single mums. I was raised by a single mum. I can't hate single mums. No, you've lost.
Yeah.
No, you need to stay. Don't get defensive. You need to be vulnerable and open to disarm their attacks, because their attacks are not in good faith. Their attacks really are just trying to label you as someone who hates single mums. Like, hang on, that's not what I'm talking about.
Yeah. It's the what was it? Kathy Newman with Jordan Peterson. Oh, so you're saying so you're saying you hate single mums. But what I'm saying is that a nuclear family with both parents present is preferable to a single mum. I don't hate single mums. That's
even that. You try and go one step further, because there you're defending I don't hate single mums. I'm trying to figure out a way to turn it on them and say, listen, I don't think you understand how important single mums are.
We can call them nuclear family phobes.
Nuclear family phobes. No, but you see, if I was extolling the virtues of a nuclear family and they said, oh, so you hate single mums, they're not as good, they can't raise their kids as well, I wouldn't fight them, because that's a losing battle. I'd turn around and say, Pietro, do you not understand how important single mums are? When the nuclear family breaks down, Pietro, it's always the mums who pick up the pieces and stay. Do you know how rare that is? I applaud them for doing that and trying to keep this sense of a nuclear structure alive, even though they can't. So I don't know why you have a problem with single mums, Pietro, but I think they are key in our messy world. So what I'm doing is I'm using I'm not debating you. Screw you. I'm doing what the left do, and I'm turning it back on you to say, well, what's your view? Like, why are you so angry right now, Pietro? Like, were you raised with a single mum like I was? Like, why are you so triggered by this? And I think that's the way to get the left, is to be unflappable.
Yeah, I'm bad at that. That's a good point, because the instinct, right, is I'm not a bad person. Listen to my and it's wrong. It's an incorrect instinct. The instinct is the correct response is what you're doing is manipulative. You're the bad person. My view is correct. That might sound arrogant, but
or do the full rollover. Say, well, maybe I am being really mean to single mums. Do you think I am? And they'll say, yeah, because you're saying nuclear family. Well, what should I say? Well, you should say that there are all types of this is what I want Discernable, right? You see me do all the time. And they can often end up hanging themselves in conversation. So I want to encourage everyone that's here fighting for libertarianism, which probably most of your viewers, to be less combative, because if you can just shoulder a little bit more vulnerability, you know that your position is more logical. You know that, right? So please have a bit of faith and trust in that logic, right? Allow the other side to unravel.
Yeah, that's I think that it's actually a very valuable skill, and it's one that does require some mastery, which clearly you've gotten some degree of mastery in that over the course of your Discernable career. We are close to we're well past the hour mark, actually. We're not close to it. We had better wrap up. Are there any last thoughts? I think that was a good message to leave with. Are there any last thoughts that we wanted to share?
No, that's the one. I do think about ice cream every time I see you, gentlemen. I don't know. So I'm going to Sydney next week to do this gig with Robert Clancy and Asim Malhotra, the cardiologist from the BBC. And Anita's Gelato. I might have said this on the last podcast. Yeah. They're a chain. You should check out Anita's Gelato. I'm a big fan.
Some good positive association to have our faces and ice cream. That's
Thank you very much.
Is it too early to eat ice cream?
It's never too early to explain. Thank you very much for having me on the show twice, gentlemen. I hope that it's been of value to your audience. I hope your podcast grows.
Thank you. It's a pleasure, and it's always a very deep conversation with you, which is well appreciated. Thank you very much for coming on a second time. Lovely to have you as always, Matt. For those of you who are watching, please like us on Instagram, follow us on Spotify, and subscribe to us on YouTube. Thank you very much. See you next time.
Thanks, Matt.